إلها الحق مثل الرجل للعمل، لازم المرأة يكون لها صوت، لازم المرأة يكون لها القدرة إنها تختار.
يقوم مشروع النساء كشركاء في التطوير والتقدم على تعزيز المهارات القيادية للمرأة في الشرق الأوسط وشمال أفريقيا.
بدي أترك شغلي، أنا بدي بيئة عمل آمنة.
إنه على قد ما وصل الرجل الشرقي لمرحلة من التفتح من الحضارة، بتضل قيود المجتمع وتقاليده حاكمة جزء منه.
عشان نتوظف لازم نغير نظرة المجتمع لعمل المرأة.
لازم نآمن بحالنا وبقدراتنا.
لازم نعتمد مبدأ تكافؤ الفرص.
أنا نور، درست جيولوجيا بأمريكا. إحنا عم نوقف بوجه حرية المرأة باتخاذ القرار، بس بدكم تضموا صوتكم لصوتي. عشان نتوظف لازم نغير مادة 69 من قانون العمل ومش حفظ، ونخلق مساواة في فرص العمل في كل القطاعات.
نسبة البطالة بين الإناث وخاصة خريجات الجامعات هي ضعف للذكور، ولذلك لازم نشتغل أكثر على الاستفادة من استثمارنا في تعليم المرأة.
المرأة ما عم بيتم صقل أو أخذ خبرات بتحتاجها للحياة العملية أو للعمل بالبنوك وتترفع في وظيفتها.
المرأة اللي بتعمل وظيفتها وبتخلق وظائف وعندها القدرة على المجازفة.
المرأة الإقليمية حاضرة في المشهد السياسي والاقتصادي.
تصميم المشروع لما عندك 3 فرع عم تشتغل، جمعيات في الأردن وجمعيات في المغرب وجمعيات في الكويت. طب نهاية هالمشروع شو هي؟ هي مشاركة الأفكار والاستنتاجات والنجاحات اللي تحققت خلال هالسنتين، وكمان تشبيك، لأنه هي فكرة المشروع من البداية هي مشاركة بين صانعي القرار وصانعي الفكر.
ركزنا على محور المرأة والعمل، ركزنا على محور المرأة والعنف، ركزنا على محور الصورة النمطية للمرأة.
May your ما في إشي اسمه مستحيل وما في إشي اسمه حواجز أو barriers. ما في ولا limits بالحياة.
You know the problems better than I do, but just a few strike me as very important. The lack of equal pay for equal work.
كان في حوار شيق حول المواد 29 و 69 من قانون العمل. احنا نؤمن بالتشاركية دائما والحوار مع المجتمع المدني بشكل عام. بالنسبة للمادة 29 بالتأكيد سوف نراعيها في مشروع قانون العمل، ولكن اللي صار بالنسبة لمادة 69 يعني إما راح يتم إلغائها وإما راح توضع تعليمات لتنظيمها وإعطاء المرأة حقها وترك حرية الاختيار لها إن شاء الله في هذا المجال.
شفنا ثقافة ثانية كمان اللي هي ثقافة الوصاية المشددة والحماية المشددة. هلا نحن مش قادرين نوقف التحرش الجنسي، فشو بدنا نعمل؟ بدنا نحن نحبس ونوقف أعمال معينة للمرأة وأوقات معينة، لأن نحن عملنا قصور من جهة معينة، فبدنا نعمل حماية مشددة، وهون إجت مادة 69.
استمرار التعامل مع المرأة على أنها قاصر تحتاج لآخر لكي يكون يعني وصي عليها في قراراتها وليوفر لها الحماية. رتب عليها كثير من القضايا من نوع تحديد الأعمال اللي بتقدر النساء تشتغل فيها.
هنالك لا زالت لغاية الآن تشريعات تمييزية تجاه النساء، ودائما ما أستخدم أنا مصطلحين: إزالة التمييز وأيضا تشريعات صديقة للمرأة.
بعد العلم هنالك العمل. المرأة المتعلمة أيضا قادرة على أن تتبوأ أفضل المناصب.
من أول ما جيت على ديوان التشريع فكرة دعم المرأة، أول شيء عملنا عم نعدل هيكل التنظيم الإداري، فقررت إنشاء وحدة للنوع الاجتماعي في ديوان التشريع.
المرأة إلها الحق مثل الرجل للعمل. لازم المرأة يكون لها صوت، لازم المرأة يكون لها القدرة إنها تختار.
يقوم مشروع النساء كشركاء في التطوير والتقدم على تعزيز المهارات القيادية للمرأة في الشرق الأوسط وشمال أفريقيا.
ما بدي أترك شغلي، أنا بدي بيئة عمل آمنة.
إنه على قد ما وصل الرجل الشرقي لمرحلة من التفتح من الحضارة بتضل قيود المجتمع وتقاليده حاكمة جزء منه.
عشان نتوظف لازم نغير نظرة المجتمع لعمل المرأة.
لازم نآمن بحالنا وبقدراتنا.
لازم نعتمد مبدأ تكافؤ الفرص.
أنا نور، درست جيولوجيا بأمريكا. إحنا عم نوقف بوجه حرية المرأة باتخاذ القرار، بس بدكم تضموا صوتكم لصوتي. عشان نتوظف لازم نغير مادة 69 من قانون العمل مش حفظ، ونخلق مساواة في فرص العمل في كل القطاعات.
نسبة البطالة بين الإناث وخاصة خريجات الجامعات هي ضعف للذكور، ولذلك لازم نشتغل أكثر على الاستفادة من استثمارنا في تعليم المرأة.
المرأة ما عم بيتم صقل أو أخذ خبرات بتحتاجها للحياة العملية أو للعمل بالبنوك وتترفع في وظيفتها.
المرأة اللي بتعمل وظيفتها وبتخلق وظائف وعندها القدرة على المجازفة.
المرأة الأردنية حاضرة في المشهد السياسي والاقتصادي.
تصميم المشروع لما عندك 3 فرع عم تشتغل، جمعيات في الأردن وجمعيات في المغرب وجمعيات في الكويت. طب نهاية هالمشروع شو هي؟ هي مشاركة الأفكار والاستنتاجات والنجاحات اللي تحققت خلال هالسنتين، وكمان تشبيك، لأنه هي فكرة المشروع من البداية هي مشاركة بين صانعي القرار وصانعي الفكر.
ركزنا على محور المرأة والعمل، ركزنا على محور المرأة والعنف، ركزنا على محور الصورة النمطية للمرأة.
ما في إشي اسمه مستحيل، وما في إشي اسمه حواجز أو barriers. ما في ولا limits بالحياة.
You know the problem better than I do, but just a few strike me as very important. The lack of equal pay for equal work.
كان في حوار شيق حول المواد 29 و 69 من قانون العمل. احنا نؤمن بالتشاركية دائما والحوار مع المجتمع المدني بشكل عام. بالنسبة للمادة 29 بالتأكيد سوف نراعيها في مشروع قانون العمل، ولكن اللي صار بالنسبة لمادة 69 يعني إما راح يتم إلغائها وإما راح توضع تعليمات لتنظيمها وإعطاء المرأة حقها وترك حرية الاختيار لها إن شاء الله في هذا المجال.
شو عندنا ثقافة ثانية كمان اللي هي ثقافة الوصاية. الوصاية المشددة والحماية المشددة. هلا نحن مش قادرين نوقف التحرش الجنسي، فشو بدنا نعمل؟ بدنا نحن نحبس ونوقف أعمال معينة للمرأة وأوقات معينة، لأن نحن عملنا قصور من جهة معينة، فبدنا نعمل حماية مشددة، وهون إجت المادة 69.
استمرار التعامل مع المرأة على أنها قاصر تحتاج لآخر لكي يكون يعني وصي عليها في قراراتها وليوفر لها الحماية. رتب عليه كثير من القضايا من نوع تحديد الأعمال اللي بتقدر النساء تشتغل فيها.
هنالك لا زالت لغاية الآن تشريعات تمييزية تجاه النساء، ودائما ما أستخدم أنا مصطلحين: إزالة التمييز وأيضا تشريعات صديقة للمرأة.
بعد العلم هنالك العمل. المرأة المتعلمة أيضا قادرة على أن تتبوأ أفضل المناصب.
من أول ما جيت على ديوان التشريع فكرة دعم المرأة، أول شيء عملنا عم نعدل الهيكل التنظيمي الإداري، فقررت إنشاء وحدة للنوع الاجتماعي في ديوان التشريع.
إلها الحق مثل الرجل للعمل. لازم المرأة يكون إلها صوت، لازم المرأة يكون إلها القدرة إنها تختار.
يقوم مشروع النساء كشركاء في التطوير والتقدم على تعزيز المهارات القيادية للمرأة في الشرق الأوسط وشمال أفريقيا.
بدي أترك شغلي، أنا بدي بيئة عمل آمنة.
إنه على قد ما وصل الرجل الشرقي لمرحلة من التفتح من الحضارة، بتضل قيود المجتمع وتقاليده حاكمة جزء منه.
عشان نتوظف لازم نغير نظرة المجتمع لعمل المرأة.
لازم نآمن بحالنا وبقدراتنا. لازم نعتمد مبدأ تكافؤ الفرص.
أنا نور، درست جيولوجيا بأمريكا. إحنا عم نوقف بوجه حرية المرأة باتخاذ القرار، بس بدكم تضموا صوتكم لصوتي عشان نتوظف لازم نغير مادة 69 من قانون العمل، مش حفظ، ونخلق مساواة في فرص العمل في كل القطاعات.
نسبة البطالة بين الإناث وخاصة خريجات الجامعات هي ضعف للذكور، ولذلك لازم نشتغل أكثر على الاستفادة من استثمارنا في تعليم المرأة.
المرأة ما عم بيتم صقل أو أخذ خبرات بتحتاجها للحياة العملية أو للعمل بالبنوك وتترفع في وظيفتها.
المرأة اللي بتعمل وظيفتها وبتخلق وظائف وعندها القدرة على المجازفة.
المرأة الأردنية حاضرة في المشهد السياسي والاقتصادي.
تصميم المشروع لما عندك 3 فرع عم تشتغل، جمعيات في الأردن وجمعيات في المغرب وجمعيات في الكويت، طب نهاية هالمشروع شو هي؟ هي مشاركة الأفكار والاستنتاجات والنجاحات اللي تحققت خلال هالسنتين، وكمان تشبيك، لأنه هي فكرة المشروع من البداية هي مشاركة بين صانعي القرار وصانعي الفكر.
ركزنا على محور المرأة والعمل، ركزنا على محور المرأة والعنف، ركزنا على محور الصورة النمطية للمرأة.
ما في إشي اسمه مستحيل وما في إشي اسمه حواجز أو barriers. ما في ولا limits بالحياة.
You know the problems better than I do, but just a few strike me as very important. The lack of equal pay for equal work.
كان في حوار شيق حول المواد 29 و 69 من قانون العمل. احنا نؤمن بالتشاركية دائما والحوار مع المجتمع المدني بشكل عام. بالنسبة للمادة 29 بالتأكيد سوف نراعيها في مشروع قانون العمل، ولكن اللي صار بالنسبة لمادة 69 يعني إما راح يتم إلغائها وإما راح توضع تعليمات لتنظيمها وإعطاء المرأة حقها وترك حرية الاختيار لها إن شاء الله في هذا المجال.
شفنا ثقافة ثانية كمان اللي هي ثقافة الوصاية المشددة والحماية المشددة. هلا نحن مش قادرين نوقف التحرش الجنسي، فشو بدنا نعمل؟ بدنا نحن نحبس ونوقف أعمال معينة للمرأة وأوقات معينة، لأن نحن عملنا قصور من جهة معينة، بدنا نعمل حماية مشددة، وهون إجت المادة 69.
استمرار التعامل مع المرأة على أنها قاصر تحتاج لآخر لكي يكون يعني وصي عليها في قراراتها ويوفر لها الحماية. رتب عليها كثير من القضايا من نوع تحديد الأعمال اللي بتقدر النساء تشتغل فيها.
هنالك لا زالت لغاية الآن تشريعات تمييزية تجاه النساء، ودائما ما أستخدم أنا مصطلحين: إزالة التمييز وأيضا تشريعات صديقة للمرأة.
بعد العلم هنالك العمل. المرأة المتعلمة أيضا قادرة على أن تتبوأ أفضل المناصب.
من أول ما جيت على ديوان التشريع فكرة دعم المرأة، أول شيء عملنا عم نعدل هيكل التنظيم الإداري، فقررت إنشاء وحدة للنوع الاجتماعي في ديوان التشريع.
Welcome our participants, and good morning to the participants that are joining us from the West, and good afternoon for those who are joining us from the East. I hope that you are keeping healthy and safe in the midst of this global pandemic. And Ramadan Kareem for those of you who are observing the month of Ramadan. I'd like to welcome you and thank you for joining us for our first webinar series for Women as Partners in Progress in order for us to amplify our voice during our COVID-19 crisis. To give you a background about the WPP, or the Women as Partners in Progress project, it's an initiative that was started in 2017, and it started as a contribution from the Middle East Partnership Initiative. It started as a regional initiative implemented by the University of Maryland by Dr. Mayri Hani, who will be speaking soon. And it is implemented in 3 countries: Jordan, Morocco, and Kuwait. And these series of seminars and these series of webinars are led by the Jordan WPP chapter. The idea is that we wanted to instigate public action through the power of collective voice. So before everything, I would like to introduce the WPP initiator, Dr. Mayri Hani. It's a brainchild of an idea of Dr. Mayri Hani. Mayri Hani is a pioneer in girls' education and an advocate of women's rights. She served as the co-chair of the United Nations Girls' Education Initiative, UNGAI, and she wrote a book called Keeping the Promise. And we are now keeping the promise, and we continue by amplifying our voice, especially in this time of the crisis, of the COVID crisis and the COVID-19 crisis. So Dr. Mayri Hani, why don't you go ahead and start the session?
Thank you, Mayada. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody. Ramadan Kareem, Ramadan Mubarak for all those who are observing Ramadan. I would like to start by saying this webinar and this series of webinar is really the idea of Mayada Abu Jaber and her planning and her organizing this activity, which is a very important activity. Mayada asked me to talk about women's leadership in the era of the coronavirus. And I, of course, did what she asked me to do. I've been following the news of the coronavirus pandemic very carefully. And I've been curious about what this pandemic is doing and what what its impact. And I've been interested in it for, of course, a large number of reasons. One of the reasons that I've been interested in and I've been observing is to learn about the leadership of women and men during this coronavirus pandemic. Of course, in 2020, the number of women, national and global leaders is by far smaller than the number of men, national leaders and global leaders. Women make up less than 7% of all the national leaders in our world in 2020. However, with that said, among the countries which have done a better job of handling and addressing the coronavirus pandemic, the percentage of women leaders is disproportionately higher, and it's higher to a significant degree, those who have done a better job. Some researchers are asking several questions regarding this fact. The fact that women, the percentage of women leaders who are doing a better job than men leaders is higher. So they came up with two main questions to answer why is that a fact. The first question, do women have a different leadership style than men? And the second question is, do the present women leaders, those who are less than 7% in the world as national leaders, arrive to their leadership position better prepared because they face many additional hurdles, in particular gender-based hurdles, and they face these hurdles on their path to leadership, on their way to becoming a leader to that position. So maybe because of that, they're better prepared. These are questions, hypothetical questions for research. I decided after I read many studies, preliminary studies, because this is all new to all of us, I decided to ask another research question, which is, do women leaders communicate in a more effective way? And especially in difficult times, very difficult times. Let us explore the three questions. Experts, researchers, and analysts argue that any leader, women or man, can be successful if she or he is able to demonstrate a balance between strategic thinking and compassion. Experts also state that in times of crisis, leaders have to be able to quickly understand the big picture and its implications, and in particular its implications and impact, and to, as a result, to quickly make strategic decisions that benefit his or her population. Also, experts say when leaders communicate, they have to be respectful of the truth, to be transparent, and if the crisis involves science, they have to be fully respectful of science and of facts. They need to be guided by science. Based on the above, I researched and read many articles and studies that came up lately. All of this, as I said, is very recent and very new. And I researched those studies and articles that came up about women. Here is what I found. The vast majority of the women leaders have responded quickly to the pandemic with effective early intervention measures. I also found that under the leadership of women, several countries have shown a higher percentage of testing per capita. Of course, I'm not talking about absolute numbers, I'm talking about per capita. So they immediately tested their population and the percentages were higher. The third finding was that the majority of women leaders communicated with utmost respect to the truth and to science, and with a healthy balance between strength and compassion. Let me give you examples. And I'm going to take 4 examples from 4 different countries in 4 different geographical regions, and with a number of population that varies between small, medium, and large. So let me start with New Zealand. New Zealand has a population of 5 million. The Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, took early action to shut down tourism, although New Zealand is a country that totally relies and lives on tourism, and also took action very early on to impose a lockdown approach on the entire country, thus limiting the coronavirus deaths to 18. And these statistics that I'm giving you are as of yesterday, April 26. As of yesterday, all of the statistics. Let me move to Germany, a much larger country with a population of 83 million. So different region. This is in Europe. The other one is near Australia, New Zealand. One is smaller, one is much larger, 83 million, Germany. The Chancellor of Germany, Angela Merkel, who happened to have a doctorate in quantum chemistry, has made decisions on this pandemic totally driven by science and facts, and not based on political perspectives. She made an executive order for widespread testing in Germany. This program became the largest scale coronavirus testing in all of Europe. By April 26, again yesterday, Germany had tested 2,072,669, the highest number of individuals tested among all the countries of Europe. Let me move to another country, Taiwan. Taiwan has 24 million in terms of population. When the president of Taiwan learned about the mysterious virus in December, and yes, I called it mysterious because in December, it was very early, very few leaders knew about it. So it was very unknown. The president, she immediately ordered all planes coming from Wuhan, China to be inspected. That's in December. She also very early on set up an epidemic command center and ramped up the production of PPEs. These early and aggressive measures limited the outbreak to just 429 cases and the death only to 6 in a country with a population of 24 million. Finally, I'm going to give you a 4th example of a country with a women leader, Iceland, and with a population of 5.5 million, is a Nordic country. And I'd like to state here that 4 of the 5 Nordic countries are led by women, Iceland being one of those 4 with a women prime minister, Katrin Jakobsdóttir. She ordered large-scale testing, and because of her country's randomized testing of the coronavirus, the world, the whole world, all the countries of the world learned early on that in Iceland, they found that around half of the people who test positive are asymptomatic. A very important finding, an extremely useful finding. Also, the total number of deaths in Iceland is limited to 10 only. And again, all the statistics I'm giving you are as of yesterday, April 26. Basically, these early and aggressive decisions based on science, strategic thinking, decisiveness, and compassion limited the outbreak in these countries. These leaders also communicated with their population based on the facts. They were transparent, and their objective was to arm their people with knowledge and scientific information so people can make decisions in a smart way. I want to be clear. I am not saying whatsoever that we do not have men leaders who behaved in the same way as these 4 women leaders, whom I took as example of strategic and effective leadership in these coronavirus times. I am saying, however, the percentage of women leaders from the total number of women leaders who took early decisive measures is by far higher than the percentage, not the absolute number, of men leaders from the total number of men leaders who did the same. However, for the sake of fairness, I will quickly just list names of men leaders who were strategic and effective during the coronavirus times. These examples are Jordan's King Abdullah, Morocco King Mohammed VI, the President of South Korea, Moon Jae-in, and the Governor of New York State, Andrew Cuomo. So I gave you 4 men and I gave you 4 women. But the issue is not here. The issue is percentage-wise from the total number of women national leaders and percentage-wise from the total number of men leaders, national leaders, the percentage is much higher of women who took effective decisions and strategic decisions very quickly. Based on all the above and on the preliminary research and articles, the 2 most important findings, to my knowledge, are there is today in the world a disproportionate number of leaders who acted quickly in a strategic and effective way who are women. This high percentage of women leaders who have taken early, smart, strategic steps based on science in order to control the spread of the virus and to save lives. That is the first finding. The second is these early strategic decisions had inarguably tremendous consequences on limiting the spread of the virus and on saving lives. I thank you all. Mayada, back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Mayri Hani, for these opening remarks. We're going to start our session now, but before we jump into the sessions, I just want to give some grounding rules. This is our first webinar, and it's going to be a series of many other webinars to follow. I just would like to say a couple of things. First of all, the participants are all muted with no videos, and the reason for this is first to avoid any breaking of connectivity, and also so we can have a more structured webinar. The speakers will speak for 10 minutes, and you will have the option as participant to ask questions. So you can plug in the questions in the question and answer box. I will choose 2 of these questions because we only have 5 minutes of questioning after every speaker. Also, at the end of the webinar, please stay with us and please give us your feedback. We have a small survey. Your feedback is very important because we're going to be doing a series of this, so it would be great if you can tell us how we're doing and how we can improve with our thank you very much, May. I'm going to first, before we go to jump to our speakers, I'm going to start by sharing some of the work that zooming in a bit on Jordan and sharing some of the responses that, so I'm going to share my video, my presentation. So some of the response that we have got in Jordan. Let me just go to the next slide. Sorry about this. So it was March 1st when we first got our first case. We had been watching for about 3 months what was happening with the pandemic in the world. We knew it came from China and Europe, and then March 1st there was a first case. And then the Jordan Strategy Forum on March 25th gives us this graph, and we're like in a shock. So basically, if we do not do any protective measures, so no closures, no curfew, none of that, numbers, 81% of the population will get infected. And the carrying capacity, which is basically here, is going to be somewhere here 15,000. So we're going to go way beyond our carrying capacity, and it's going to be pushed to October. But if we use protective measures, look at this. 1st of May, things are going to settle. So it was a great graph for us to, first of all, to make us, wake up and realize that we have to do something about it. And then the government acted really fast. And this is a graph. I will just explain to you really fast what's happened. They acted really fast. First of all, the government decided that they are going to adopt a defense law and issued several defense orders. Then we got our curfew for about 4 days, which was sometime in between May 14 and the 20th. And then after that, throughout the coming month, we had very limited mobility. No cars could move, only by walking. And if you look at the last 2 weeks, look at that. Look at the numbers. They've all dropped below 10. So, yep, it is 25th of April, and hopefully we reach where we reach in May. So we are very proud. We were all over the news because we had such quick response. And Jordan was recognized for doing so great and for containing the virus. And we started. So the curfew, tell you a bit about curfew, was until at 6 o'clock there would be sirens, and at 8 o'clock we would have the daily update, what's going on. So our Minister of Health, Mr. Saad Jaber, who became really famous, he is actually something like Anthony Fauci of the US, the doctor. He's a cardiologist, and he's worked for a long time in the military, and so he would tell us about the numbers, and then the media minister would also reiterate about some of the activities and different defense law. We reached to Defense Law 9, and then we would have our Prime Minister doing all these Zoom calls with the different ministers, as you can see here. And because we're so active on social media, the Jordanian population the internet penetration is really high, and we have very high social media presence. We started creating all these beautiful cartoons and visuals. Here, we're so proud of our Minister of Health. And then, as you know, many people were on Netflix. There was this Netflix mock-up that came up with the Jordanian heroes that made it work. Do what you can with what you have, wherever you are. And this mock-up showed the 6 Jordanian heroes. The thing with the whole kind of scene is that it's a very masculine scene. And what's really missing are the women. You can see here is our Prime Minister, the Minister of Health, the Minister of Communication, then the Minister of Labor, and so on. So what's really missing is actually the women. And that's why we felt that we need to alleviate raise the voice of women, especially in our part of the region, and bring them to the front, because they are combating the coronavirus in the front line. They should be also represented. And so why is it important? Because in the beginning, women are the most exposed. They're nurses, they're midwives, they're staff, they're healthcare workers, they're social service workers in the field. In the MENA region, the healthcare, we have some of the highest percentage of healthcare workers are women. 66% of pharmacists are women, and 44% of health workers. In addition to that, because schools were closed very early, they were not closed, sorry, they were they had remote education, and because businesses also had to work remotely, much of the care work was also the responsibility of the woman. So the woman was working, helping, doing house chores, educating the children, taking care of the elderly. So the whole kind of work was landed upon her. We know that the participation of women in the labor force in the Arab region is among the lowest. The UN Women and ESCWAP issued this report saying that 1.7 million jobs will be lost. Among them is 700,000 Jordanian women. 700,000 Arab women. Of course, domestic violence also raised because of the family tension. And finally, access to information education is very important, because with remote classroom, what is the connectivity like? How is it helping girls' education? And in the end, who really has the access to cell phones and laptops and so on? So that's why it was very important for us to initiate this series so we can highlight these issues. Before I go into the session, I wanted to share with you this data that I got. We've been working on a project funded by the Netherlands Embassy in our affiliate organization, Geonomics, on training and employment programs. We've trained and employed more than 500 women in these 5 governorates. We were actually, after when the pandemic happened, a month later, we wanted to see how they were doing and what was the community like and what was the perception of the community in these areas, in these locations. And they're small communities in the governorate. So out of 7,000 respondents, we asked, do you believe women have the right to work? And 97% said yes. Do you believe women should work in specific occupations? So 47% said, 47.9% said, yeah, women should have certain jobs and men others. Then say, do you believe women are less capable than men at work? 26% said yes. It's quite large, and especially when you see such a masculine scene, most probably this is what's coming out of it. And then they said, are the women the weakest link in the labor market due to coronavirus? And 46% said yes, they are. And so then we looked at the women's perception. 250 women were contacted and asked, of course, in an anonymous survey, so they don't write their names. So we asked them, have the household chores increased during the COVID crisis? 54.7% said, yes, they have increased. So, and then the next question was, are you suffering negative economic consequences? So almost 48%, half of them felt that it affected them negatively. Okay, look at these 2 questions, which we thought that we're not gonna get such answers. Are you experiencing verbal violence? 17% said yes. Are you experiencing physical violence? 9% said yes. And we were shocked at these results because we had already trained these women, and we had trained them on ethics, we had trained them on agency, we had trained them on how to, manage work, family, life, and so on. So we felt the numbers were a bit high given the training they got. If you look at the table here also, this was one of the papers that was written. It shows that the jobs that are lost due to the curfew, you would see that in the informal sector, 71.4, which is where women occupy most of the informal sector. Public sector, 25, private sector, 36, but look at this big number. So these numbers were quite worrying for us, and we felt that action needs to be taken. Let's look at the education sector. The Ministry of Education was very quick in launching the Darsa platform. It reached all public schools. They initiated it with a partnership with Abwab, which is an ed tech, and it's like a startup. So they had the agility, so they were really ready to launch really fast. 61.5% of the students benefited from the TV channels and the platform. Sorry. But we need to look at what are some of the messages that are disseminated even on these platforms. In my research at Echidna, as an Echidna Global Scholar, I realized that that imagery of women in the curriculum nationally is a very powerful conduit for teaching girls their proper place in society. What scholars call what is known as the hidden curriculum or hidden messages, and they are the ones that actually shape values and including gender norms. So remember this? So this is the imagery that we saw. This is a mock-up of Netflix that one of the social media, like an activist, had posted. I think, what do we need to do? We decided at WPP Jordan, maybe we need to create a counter visual. And the counter visual was actually Superman with the people of Jordan watching women that are actually combating the coronavirus in the front lines. So these are women that are actually one of our women from our program that are doing protective masks. Here are women that are in the lab. And then we realized, wait a minute, Superwoman, why Superman? Maybe you should have a Superwoman as Jordan with the people. And then this, if you see, is a woman working in the army. And this is a woman actually a scientist at the Foreign Scientific Society studying bats since 2017 in one of the few centers in the world that are studying bats since 2017. So really, then we said, okay, what about the counter imaging for the Netflix mock-up? Why don't we do the Jordanian heroes? And the Jordanian heroes are the minister of, in the middle is the minister of Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources. You have the Ministry of Tourism. You have the Secretary General of the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Social Development, a nurse. So these are our true heroes, aren't they? Yes. So we needed to ask ourselves several questions. First, how will gender roles and stigma be perceived as we move forward? What unseen and visible messages are we sending future generation, are sending our kids? What precedent are we setting and what messages are we designating to the public? Also, all the collective efforts of many organizations working towards equality, has it all been shattered in the wave of this COVID crisis? What are the perpetuated messages that is being legitimized and justified to erase women, maybe from leadership and maybe from history, in the part that we should be actually putting women in the forefront as they combat the virus? Winston Churchill says, never let a good crisis go to waste. So we need to use this moment to add value to what we value most. We will need to use this moment in history to consciously acknowledge, recognize, and value women's role in the economy and in the society. And I believe in these WPP series that we're going to be doing, we will raise the value of women. We will let the world, Jordan and the region understand the true role that they're playing in the economy. And with the coming three speakers, which I will start now with our first speaker, which is Asil Al-Ilayli. She will be talking to us. Asil actually works at the Arab Barometer. Asil, Arab Barometer is a non-partisan research network that provides insight into social, political, and economic attitudes and values of ordinary citizens across the Arab world. It also constitutes among the largest repository of publicly available data on the views of men and women in the MENA region. Asil has been the communication manager and responsible for developing and executing communication strategies since 2018. She also worked at the Middle East Broadcasting Network. Asil will be giving us a bit of idea about the power of data and how we can use it in this era. Asil, can you?
Yes.
Let me unshare my video and then you can start. Okay, go ahead.
Let me share my presentation. Okay. Well, first of all, sorry, I just need to hide this. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you, Mayada, for inviting me to share our latest data findings with the WPP network again. To make sure that I don't exceed the time limit for this presentation, I'll skip the introduction about the Arab Barometer, but please feel free to check out our website, arabbarometer.org, to learn more about who we are, and we have all our survey data and our reports for download free of charge. I encourage you all to subscribe to our newsletter. We have one in Arabic and another in English, so that you know our latest updates and about our surveys. So for today's presentation, it's based on our latest wave of survey that took place between September 2018 and June 2019, where we interviewed over 25,000 people in 12 countries. All the survey methodology is also on our website for your review. And just a quick note here, I'll be sharing the presentation, mainly the key findings, but I'm happy to share with you the presentation later on so you can get all the details of our percentages per country, etc. So we wanted to ask in our survey and see if citizens in the region think that Arab women in MENA are able to make effective choices and decisions for themselves and their societies. and in their societies, meaning that they take on leadership responsibilities or roles in public life. And what we found out is that citizens in the region do not think that Arab men and women should have equal rights to exercise their agency in a range of spheres. One of the questions we ask is about share of inheritance. And in all but one country surveyed, a majority do not believe that women's share of inheritance should be equal to that of men. Also, we ask about women traveling independently. And in a majority of countries surveyed, a minority say it's permissible for a woman to travel abroad by herself. And while a majority of citizens across the region support an equal right for women to divorce, including more than 2/3 in most countries, around the same margin say that husbands rather than wives should always have the final say in family decisions. And an interesting observation here is that many women agree with this statement. In the graph on the left, we have the responses of women only for this statement. And as you see, in 6 out of the 12 countries surveyed, more than half of the women believe that a husband should be the ultimate decision maker. We also see a similar pattern regarding citizens' views of women's capabilities, decision-making capabilities in the public life. The majority of citizens across the region are amenable to seeing more women as head of states, be it a president or a prime minister in their countries. But here again, we see citizens' bias in the recognition of women's political decision-making competence, where when we ask if in general men are better at political leadership than women, the majority of citizens across MENA still consider men as the more capable political leaders compared to women. And again, here we see gender bias, where in 10 out of the 12 countries surveyed, more than half of the women believe that men are better at political leadership than women. So if we want to examine this data in light of the COVID-19 crisis, we know that there's underrepresentation of women leadership in the COVID-19 responses for girls, and this is actually hurting girls and women in the Arab world who are uniquely impacted by this humanitarian crisis. And we also know that citizens' bias play a role in the lack of women occupying high-rank political leadership positions. And especially during times of crisis like this one, citizens want to see a leader that they can trust to take charge and to make the tough decisions. So given the data that I just shared with you, it's not surprising that women are excluded to a large extent from the formal top-level positions during this critical time. But then the question here is, how do we get more women into top political positions? And what might help in changing citizens' perception of women's capabilities as political leaders? Our data shows that citizens' education level does not change the perception of citizens towards women's capabilities to lead in public. But perhaps there are other mechanisms that might play a role, such as gender quota and the role model effect. In our latest survey, we asked citizens about gender quota, and we found out that in all countries surveyed, there's a broad acceptance of the implementation of women's quota for elected office. So again here, perhaps gender quota might help to expedite the change in order to achieve gender equal representation in political leadership and to create female role models in politics. So in our survey, we also found out that there are some positive attitudes towards some women's rights. One of them is the right to education, where there have been over time a change in relation to girls' and women's right to education. Historically, we know that relatively few say that university education is more important for a man than a woman. But in the past decade, this number has actually even dropped. And as you see in this graph, the most drastic drop have been in Jordan, where there have been an 18% decrease in terms of their perception that university education is more important for men and women between the years 2006 and 2018. This is followed by Morocco and Palestine, where we see a 10 percentage point decrease. And in Kuwait, where our data started in 2012, we also see a drastic drop of 18 percentage points in this sentiment. Another positive attitude is about the right for women to work, where in most of the countries surveyed, a majority of citizens affirm that a married woman can work outside the home if she wants to. Now, the fact that the citizens in the region are now approving towards women's right to education and to work is actually promising, because when we analyze the responses of over 12,500 women in the Arab world, we notice that college-educated women create a ripple effect which can help in breaking the cycle of economic hardship and gender inequality. Our data shows that across MENA, women with a university degree education or a technical degree education have better chances of securing a job, make a difference for their family's economic security, and are more likely to have more independence in household decision-making. So in the first circle of this ripple effect of higher education is in employability. And although women's employment in the MENA region is relatively low, only 20% of women across the region reported in our survey that they are employed. But we still notice that those with higher education participate in the workforce at a higher rate, around 24%. And on average, it's around 36-point difference. So for example, here in the table, we see that in Jordan, among women with a technical or a university degree, 30% of them say that they are employed. That's compared with only 4% of women with a secondary degree or below. And the second circle in the ripple effect is the improved economic conditions for the households. We found out that households that include women who are employed are less likely to face economic hardship in comparison with households where women are unemployed. When we asked the citizens if the net household income covers their expenses and are either able to save or covers their expenses without any notable difficulties, a higher share of employed women than unemployed women said yes. And on average, it's around 15 percentage point difference. And the third circle in the this ripple effect is women's attitudes about decision-making at home. In 8 out of the 12 countries that we surveyed, we see a smaller share of employed women than unemployed women conceding to having husbands as the final decision makers. And on average, it's around 12 points difference. So what the implication here means is that women's employment and initially their education level might actually help in shifting the balance of power and impacting women's agency in household decision-making. Now, if we want to examine this again in light of the COVID-19 crisis, the main concern is that the corona pandemic might unravel the limited progress that we have seen in terms of gender equality, women's participation in the workforce, and the positive attitudes towards some women's rights and their roles in society and in the Arab world. In fact, 67% of citizens in the Middle East and North Africa say that when jobs are scarce, men should be more entitled to a job rather than a woman. And this data is based on from the World Values Survey that was conducted between 2010 and 2014. So what's crucial now is to ensure that the access to learning is a top priority for girls and women in the Middle East and North Africa. Otherwise, the loss of education due to the corona pandemic will actually reverse the previously mentioned gains and progress. And this will ultimately affect the lives of girls and women in the Arab world for generations. Another challenge facing many women in the Arab world that have been exacerbated as a result of the extended lockdown is actually domestic violence. And our data shows that from our latest wave of surveys, that domestic violence is relatively high in Yemen at 26%, followed by Morocco at 25% and Egypt at 23%. And the lowest households of domestic violence are in Libya at 7% and in Jordan, Lebanon, and Tunisia at 6%. But when domestic abuse exists, Lebanon topped the countries in terms of women as victims at 82%. This is followed by Egypt at 72% and Morocco at 71%. And the lowest percentage of women victims of abuse reported was in Libya at 34% and Yemen at 30%. We also found out that domestic violence is still considered a private family matter in the Arab world. Only in Lebanon did the majority of women victims report domestic violence to the local police, 49% of them. Whereas the majority of women victims in the rest of the Arab countries say that they seek help from their female or male relatives. And this actually means that the rule of law is not applied and the abuser does not get the punishment for their actions. Only a minority in the Arab world considers seeking help and assistance from local police or the hospital. And nearly no one seeks support from local organizations. And now with the prolonged quarantining, this has made it even more difficult for women to leave their homes in order to seek help from their relatives. So based on this data, it's clear that there needs to be more education and awareness about gender-based violence, strengthening of healthcare sector responses, sensitizing the local police and the legal systems, and an increased support for the local NGOs who are helping women living with this domestic violence. And with this recommendation, I end my presentation for today.
Thank you, Asil. Thank you for your presentation, Asil. It was very enlightening. We don't have many questions. Please keep the questions going so we can ask Asil. Asil, there's one question here that maybe you can actually answer, and then I have one question. From the question answered, do men perceive women as not up to a task of dealing and handling a national crisis, especially in public? Or is it that women themselves are not stepping in the region?
Can you repeat the
So do men perceive women as not up to a task of dealing and handling a national crisis, especially in public? Like, do they feel women are incapable of doing it? Or is it women that are not stepping up? What is it? Why do we see the masculine, why do you see the masculine scene in our region?
So clearly from our data findings, can you hear me?
A bit loud, yeah.
Okay, so clearly from our data findings, we see that the public perception in general, even before the crisis, is that men are better at handling tough decision making in comparison with women. And even women agree with this statement. So like I mentioned, even the education level, which usually helps to empower women more and makes them more exposed, and citizens in general, does not influence them. And in times of crisis, usually citizens would prefer the person that they perceive as the tough and the more capable decision maker to be in power. So for the time being, clearly in the Middle East and North Africa, their perception is that men are better at leading. The issue, I think, is that we're not seeing enough women as role models and in political leadership. And there are studies that show that if there's the role model effect, so if they've seen more women in top leadership positions, then they might accept it more and see that women are actually capable to do this. That's why one of the solutions might be gender quota, which can help to expedite this situation so that we see more women in the forefront taking on formal leadership positions. I cannot hear you.
I'll unmute now, sorry. So another question, why aren't we seeing women on business boards in the Middle East on decision-making position? What is holding them back pre-corona and advice on post-corona, your thoughts? So I think probably the idea is that you don't see them on boards, you don't see them in leadership. So now they're even more hidden. So
it's kind of the same idea, like with women in political leadership. The idea that there's no role models, not enough role models that can help them to be there. But in one example from our survey that shows that women and men who apply to have their own business businesses face the same challenges when they want to apply to get a permit to open their business. But when we ask them if they tried to apply for a business, clearly we see that the percentage of women who try to apply is way less than those of men. We don't have in our survey yet data to explain why women are not trying to apply for businesses or maybe for higher positions in the workforce. But in our upcoming survey, that's our plan, is to dig further and see if there are social norms that are preventing them from applying for jobs or high-ranking jobs, or even taking on small businesses and entrepreneurship.
So actually that leads me into my question. So data is very important. And the thing is, in this crisis, there is lack of data. We don't have gender segregated data, and we don't really have the power of information to actually really show the country, show the world that, or show the region that we need to create change. So is the Arab Barometer or other the data collecting agencies, is it going to work in the coming month or so, or a couple of months, in collecting data in this time where it's most important and where we need it for decision making and for like advocating and pushing for our our position in leadership?
So yeah, that's a good question. Actually, our plan was, before the corona pandemic, to be in the field to do our 6th wave of surveys in July. But because of the corona pandemic, our surveys are usually face-to-face. So we have to push it for a couple of months later. But in the meantime, we're considering doing surveys in another way, probably either over the phone or on the internet. And definitely there will be an equal number of women and men that are surveyed in order to have a representative survey. So once we have our data, we have to test them and see actually if also the quality is good. So, but if it was good, we'd be happy to share them with you.
Okay, so this question came actually. This question actually came from the maybe Facebook Live. I'm not sure. Maybe you can tell me. But it says, what is the situation now with COVID-19 in terms of those women who are shying away from work, those who have been put on unpaid leave compared to men?
What is the situation?
Yeah, so what will happen to these women? They say shying away from work, but basically now everybody went into remote work. So now they're going to lay off some of the workforce, right? So what do you think is the situation of these women who've been put on unpaid leave and take as compared to men? Do you think that in our region, do you think it's going to become some kind of discrepancy?
I mean, clearly from what I mentioned in the World Values Survey, in the Middle East, it was, and North Africa, it was the highest compared to all around the globe, where there is this social norm or like the prejudice that if jobs are scarce, and due to the corona pandemic, we clearly see that there's the unemployment rate is increasing even more. So there is a perception that the job is, men have a better opportunity or deserve to get the job rather than women. So the worry is that women will be, the unemployment rate for women will increase much more. This is one aspect of it. Another actually aspect is the education. If girls and women lose a chance to get or to continue their education for the future, not only for the immediate future, for the long-term future, it will change their lives, and then you won't see enough women in the workforce again. Because they clearly, from our data, they have a better opportunity to get employed if they have a higher education.
I know we went way ahead of time, but this is a question from Hala. What are the specific procedures that should be taken to highlight the role of women to be in the first line, since we know all the causes that prevent them to do so? So we know that they're prevented, we know the causes. What are the procedures? Like, we are doing counter narrative. What is the counter visual? Like, how can we push, how hard can we push as civil society and as leaders? I think is this maybe had a question.
So probably other experts have more information and recommendations about this, but from our data, we see that clearly there needs to be support from the governments, national policies to support women, to make them be more visible. And also education is very important for them to have an opportunity to be involved. And NGOs need also to do their part in order to help women, educate women on their roles and rights in society and society in general.
Thank you so much, Asil. Thank you for your, if there are more questions, maybe we can send it to you and you can send them in private as well and answer them. Thank you so much.
Sure, and I'm happy to share the presentation. I'll send it to you, Mayada, and you can share it with your network.
Okay, so this is recorded. Okay. And it is going live on Facebook, and we will use the recording again and we will feature it again. So we will be over the coming week reposting it again. Thank you very much, Asil. Thank you. And keep safe. Keep safe. Okay, so our next speaker is Christina Kowak. Christina is a fellow in the Center for Universal Education at Brookings Institution. Her current research focuses on gender equality in education, education for sustainable development, and 21st century skills and youth empowerment. Christina wrote the book, What Works in Girls' Education. Christina also manages the Echidna Global Scholars Program, which is a program that I actually joined. I'm a fellow of the Echidna in 2014, so that's how I know Christina, who also helped me in my research. Christina holds a PhD in Comparative and International Development Education from the University of Minnesota, and an MA in Social Sciences from University of Chicago. So Christina will talk about girls' education globally, and maybe she will zoom a little bit on the MENA region.
Hi, everybody. I'm just going to share my screen, so if you could just give me 1 second to switch over. All right, I think you all can see that now. Well, first of all, thanks to Mayada and to the Women as Partners in Progress initiative for inviting me to be a part of this very, very important discussion. I'll try to offer some points on the gender dynamics of the COVID-19 education responses as they relate to girls, but must first discuss the general education responses so that we understand from where the gendered dynamics emerge. As many of you are aware, the global education community is witnessing a historic moment in time. The closest thing our community has to compare this with is the Ebola crisis in 2014, of which school closures in 3 countries in West Africa affected 5 million learners. As of April 24th, according to UNESCO, 190 countries in the world are currently experiencing countrywide school closures, affecting about 1.6 billion learners. This translates to over 103 million learners in the MENA region alone. So while the school closures from Ebola lasted about 6 to 8 months, it's uncertain how long our present COVID circumstances will last, nor whether we will ever be able to return to schooling as usual. In an effort to avoid total disruption of schooling, governments around the world have turned to various forms and levels of remote and distance learning. As of April 14th, 90% of high-income countries have plans to provide remote learning alternatives, nearly all of which are going to be or already is being provided online, compared to less than 25% of low-income countries. And if we look specifically at the MENA region, 40% of countries in the region are offering, or less than 40% of countries in the region are offering only online education, which is the segment in green that you see there. 28% are relying on TV and radio only, which is the two orange segments. And about 22% are using a combination of online and broadcast options, which includes TV and radio. That's the blue section at the top right there. So the data, though, however, suggests that the rapid transition to online learning promises to exacerbate learning inequalities between rich and poor, as well as between boys and girls, primarily because the current state of distance learning only reaches those who are considered to be better off. The data suggests that roughly 60% of low-income countries do not have any distance learning plan in place, compared to less than 10% of high-income countries. And currently, no country has distance learning plans that include gender-based concerns or considerations. In both low and high-income countries that do have distance learning options, poorer children will have less access and will fall further behind. Data from UNESCO Institute of Statistics and the International Telecommunication Union suggests that about half of all learners do not have access to a household computer, and about 43% of all learners do not have access to internet at home. And because of gender norms and perceptions of risk to girls' safety and reputation, parents and other family members are reluctant to allow girls access to internet-enabled devices. When we look at internet coverage, we see that in the poorest countries, women are somewhere between 25% and 33% less likely to use the internet than men. And although, of course, in some parts of the world, this can be as high as 50% less likely. In the MENA region, some estimates suggest that less than 45% of women have access to the internet compared to just under 60% of men. Although again, other data sources suggest a higher percentage of women do, ranging from 54% of women in Morocco to 99% of women in Kuwait having access to the internet. But what is probably striking is that World Bank estimates that in the MENA region, while on average access to the internet costs between 4 to 8% of one's monthly income, the cost of connectivity is actually quite variable depending on one's income level. The poorest in Tunisia, Yemen, Morocco, and a few other countries in the MENA region, for instance, would have to spend 40 to 50% of their average monthly income to access the internet. So statistics like these have implications not only for learners, but also for teachers who are expected to deliver distance education. Because teachers play a vital role in whether or not countries can pull off a successful distance learning plan, we have to also consider teachers' varying access to technology, their potential lack of training to use technology for the benefit of learners, and whether they have their own childcare challenges at home to juggle amidst the quarantine. And not to mention, in many low and middle income countries, due to the rapid expansion of education in the last 2 decades, some countries see as high as 50% of their teachers do not have the minimum level of training, let alone training on ICT skills. As of April 14th, just over half of countries in the MENA region are providing some official guidance and training to teachers for remote teaching. So to recap, some of the most immediate challenges for learners as countries quickly shift to distance learning are whether they have reliable and consistent electricity, access to technology, and access to the internet. But distance learning also carries some assumptions held by governments and service providers that can further exacerbate learning inequality as well. The first one is around safety. Stay-at-home orders and the closure of shelters due to coronavirus has helped contribute to a surge in reporting of gender-based violence, as Asil also mentioned it earlier in her presentation. When we think of distance learning, we often assume that students, especially girls, are safe in their homes, when this is not the case for many. Such assumptions are around safety also extend to context of crisis. 13 of 16 countries classified as experiencing high and medium conflict levels have announced nationwide school closures. Of these, only 4 of them have plans for distance learning or other forms of student support. So 4 out of 16 conflict-affected countries. This has tremendous implications for girls and boys who are susceptible to child labor, sexual exploitation, and recruitment into armed groups. And refugees are even worse off when it comes to provisional education plans. As of March 30th, only 1 country has announced provisions for refugees, but even that provision wasn't even directly related to ensuring opportunities for continued learning during this quarantine. So this pandemic will surely create a crisis within a crisis. Another major assumption is that parents who are at home due to the lockdown have the capacity and the ability and the availability to supervise their children's online learning. In countries with high adult illiteracy, such an assumption is obviously highly problematic. And in countries where multiple languages are spoken, whether or not parents and children can understand the language of instruction also poses a number of challenges to accessing distance learning opportunities. So looking at the data, we know that 55 countries have planned to provide guides to parents to support their children while learning at home. That's only 55 countries out of the 190 countries that are currently have closed their schools. 15 countries are planning to offer radio TV instruction in more than one language. This is a minority of the countries. So altogether, this amalgamation of approaches to distance learning has both short-term consequences and long-term implications for children. And if we draw on lessons learned from school closures caused by previous public health outbreaks and crises, we know that these consequences and implications disproportionately negatively impact girls. So first, the Ebola crisis saw major losses in learning, in some cases by 50% after schools were closed for just 6 to 8 months. When we look at the state of learning globally before the COVID-19 related school closures, our starting line foreshadows great challenges ahead. More than half of children in low and middle income countries cannot read by age 10, and COVID-19 school closures could lead to a massive step backwards in progress in education. Second, in Sierra Leone, after the Ebola outbreak, girls in highly affected communities were 16% less likely to return to school when they reopened. And in Liberia, it was even worse. Before the Ebola outbreak, girls had an 8% out of school rate. And after Ebola, that nearly tripled to 21%. The high rates of school dropout were closely tied to social and reproductive health outcomes and consequences, where on average about 7.2% of girls were more likely to have become pregnant during school closures. And in high hit areas, unintended pregnancies were recorded to be as high as 65%. If COVID-19 related school dropouts follow patterns of school dropout like Ebola, projections estimate that an additional 10 million more secondary school-age girls could remain out of school after schools have reopened. And that's 10 million more than our pre-COVID approximation of 130 million girls out of school. A final lesson from Ebola is that the economic shocks from the outbreak meant that many families couldn't send their kids back to school, even if they wanted to. Many households needed their children to help alleviate the economic strains on the household. And so, for example, in Sierra Leone, they saw a 19% increase in the number of girls who were participating in income-generating activities, so many of whom did not return to school once they reopened. So this early transition to the workforce is also something that is of high consequence for girls. So how do we better understand the gender dynamics of COVID-19 school closures on girls? Well, definitely we need much more data. We need more data to understand what is no longer happening because schools are closed and to find ways to deliver this remotely or through proxies. And we also need more data to understand what is happening because schools are closed and to find out ways to better either amplify or to mitigate against those, depending on whether those things are positively or negatively impacting girls and other vulnerable populations. What we do know thus far from looking at how governments are responding is where the major gaps are in our education systems, things like trained teachers, lack of digital infrastructure, et cetera. And we also understand that by bringing an intersectional lens to analyze education systems' responses to COVID-19, that there is a major issue of access. So that is whether governments are able to provide remote learning opportunities, period. And after this challenge is resolved, then we have the bigger hurdle of ensuring quality teaching and quality learning can take place remotely. So here are a few things to keep an eye on as the pandemic unfolds, and as we hopefully begin to see more countries opening up discussions around what would it look like to reopen and to recover. So first, we'll want to watch for whether and how governments are including approaches to sustain and resume essential services to girls, including school meals, to prevent households from resorting to sending girls off to engage in paid work to supplement family incomes. We'll also want to see whether they're continuing to provide social protection to prevent or reduce gender-based violence at home, forced early marriage, and other kinds of harms to girls. And we'll also want to make sure that they're providing continued reproductive health services to prevent a spike in unwanted pregnancies. We'll also want to watch out for whether NGOs are able to pivot during this pandemic to sustain important non-formal learning and non-formal mentorship and peer opportunities and peer support. Things like mobile learning, mobile mentoring, and virtual girls clubs. What the Ebola outbreak taught us is that girls who were engaging in such non-formal learning and empowerment programs prior to the Ebola outbreak experienced better educational and life outcomes after the outbreak. And finally, we'll also want to watch how governments support the return to school. So at a general level, we know that it's especially important for the government, public health, and school officials to establish trust among the population by establishing really good hygiene practices at school, ensuring teachers are trained to handle new cases of the virus, as well as provide psychosocial support from any trauma that might have emerged during the pandemic. But importantly for girls, we'll want to see whether and how governments engage in close monitoring of sex disaggregated re-enrollment data to assess whether girls are actually lagging in their return to school. But it also means watching out for how governments are approaching flexible learning options and re-entry support, especially for girls who might find that their time away from school has further embedded them squarely into domestic work, income generating activities, or even into new roles as, with an unintended pregnancy. So that's kind of all of my remarks that I wanted to make. And I look forward to any questions that you might have, and I'll stop sharing my screen now.
Thank you very much, Christina. We have time for only 2 questions. We're running a bit short of time. Hala sent Mayada, May, Asil, Christina, the information and statistics we have will lead us to put great efforts to encourage women and empower them in order to have capabilities to lead in different aspects. Thank you and well done. This is from Hala. She also says that she wants can you prepare a special webinar about homeschooling and the difficulties facing parents, especially with small ages? And thank you. So that's the question. There aren't any questions. I'm going to ask one question. I'm going to link what you said to Asil. Asil said that the more educated the women in the Arab region, the chances of employment becomes bigger. So do you think there is now an opportunity here with this remote learning and new way of education in which women get access at home, and then maybe the possibility of employment becomes higher? Is there the kind of do you think there's an opportunity here?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm a little bit jaded in thinking that the inequities in distance learning opportunities might actually hinder that hope for more education, especially as we see that quarantine measures, women being at home, men being at home, and all of this places increased stress on women in the household, which would then prevent further educational opportunities. So I think until we can solve the gender inequalities that are happening within the household during this quarantine measure, any hope for increased education is small. And this is looking at the average population, not looking at those who might be better off and have a little bit more space and access.
Perfect. We have several questions actually from Africa, from Mary, who's joined us, one of our fellows. Mary, I didn't know who you were because you had a funny kind of a username, but she says that how would you handle class size after COVID-19? Like when they go back, the class sizes are big, and still you're talking about how are you going to handle this? And I think it's the same case here in the MENA.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. I think some education experts are really starting to think about this now, because this COVID-19 virus is really forcing us to rethink what schooling would look like if and when it opens up again. I think some current projections or ideas is that we're going to have to think about staggered schooling. So thinking about where you have, at max, the number of students in a classroom where you can maintain safe social distance, physical distance measures, which means that you can only have maybe 20 students in a classroom at a time, which would mean continued remote learning for those who are not in school during a particular week, and then physical distance measures for children who are in school during a specific week. So really thinking about staggered learning, where some children are in school for 1 week and then they're not in school the next week, to allow the next group to go in, and then so on and so forth. There are also lots of discussions around how are we going to continue distance learning, because the very fact that placing a high number of children into one single room can create risk for rapid spread of the virus again, and maybe not necessarily amongst children, but amongst other educational staff, so teachers, school leadership, and so on. So I think right now what what many education experts are beginning to think of is really how do we decrease the number of children in the physical space at one time while maintaining continued learning opportunities by thinking about ways of doing shifts, going back to that old idea of morning shift and afternoon shift and an evening shift, thinking about things like alternating schedules, but this will ultimately radically transform the way we think about education and how we think about going to school.
Thank you. There aren't a lot of questions, but I would think as a follow-up, I think there'd be a whole because the whole education system and the structure has been put like in the, 60s or 50s or like very early. So I think we need to rethink the whole structure, maybe learning in the environment and maybe outside the confinement of the schools, maybe more virtual learning. What do you envision the future of how the education look like beyond the classroom?
Yeah, well, I think the biggest thing or the biggest hurdle, at least in achieving any kind of future vision of education, is really solving this issue of access to internet and access to technology. We see that in some countries, governments have begun to work in partnership with telecommunication companies and to begin to subsidize the dissemination of tech equipment, so computers, mobile devices, and whatnot, so that that access issue is solved. Because I think ultimately what we are going to have to move towards is some form of remote learning. I know that there are also many educational experts who are talking about this being the day for ed tech to really emerge. But I think we can't really get there until we solve the access issues, because there is such a huge, 50% of learners don't have a computer in the home. 43% don't have internet. So if we see this, if we look at this, we can't transform to that new vision of education post-COVID unless we solve this issue of access. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you so much, Christina, and thank you for joining us so early. Now we'll go to our next panelist. We'll go to Judge Mahmoud Al-Tarawneh. Judge Mahmoud has recently joined our WPP network in Jordan. We are very proud as we get more men who believe in gender equality joining our group of leaders. We have become almost 80, and numbers are increasing. Let me tell you, he is the first person from the Arab world to receive a high award on the occasion of the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women from Vital Voices. We're very proud of that. He is the Vice President of the Jordanian Court of Cassation since 1982. And he is a human rights activist, a member of a number of organizations, including Vital Voices, board of the trustee of Geneva Center for Human Rights Advancement, the Jordan Coalition for the International Criminal Court, and the board of trustee of the National Center for Human Rights. He holds a PhD in law since 2000, and you've published several books, mainly in the realm of human rights, fair trial, and criminal court. And there's much to say as well. Thank you very much for joining us today. And today, just tell us a little bit more about the gender-based violence, and with the increase of violence now, how can the judicial system play a role, and how can the civil society play a role? Thank you.
Thank you, Mayada. Thank you, Mayada, for inviting me to share and participate in this very important and special meeting about relationship between Corona crisis and domestic violence in Arab region as a general, and in my country, Jordan, specifically. Before I'll start, I want to thank you, and nice meeting for my colleague who share us in this meeting, Christina and Asil and May. I want to mention something that the world and the region and Jordan before Corona, it's not look like during Corona and after Corona. And about this meeting, in my experience as a judge, as you mentioned, who deal with domestic violence cases before 25 years ago, and the member in National Center for Human Rights also, he deal about this kind of case. I want to mention something. I see that domestic violence cases, maybe you send me some question about this issue. I see the number, as you mentioned before, it's increased not only in Jordan, in region and the world, because I'll make a kind of connection with my colleague in Palestine and Morocco and Tunisia. They tell me the women face the same situation. The number it's increased, and the women faced what I mean. It's a dark number, as you mentioned, Mayada. There is a lack about the number because the woman faced a dark number about domestic violence. Why? Because there's no any real access for the woman to the justice. As you know, the court it's closed, the police department it's closed. Maybe after the crisis, we see the real number about this crisis. The first question you asked me, what the kind of domestic violence you deal with and the woman faced in this crisis. Besides the classic kind of the domestic violence cases, for example, there is a physical violence, there's a sexual violence, there's a verbal, and there is a new kind about domestic violence cases. What I mean is the violence in a crisis, for example, in what we faced in the world in Corona crisis. And I see there is another link between domestic violence and child abuse cases or child abuse violence. For example, the husband abused his wife, and the wife abused her children, and the big children abused the small children. The violences became a like circle. And the reason about the in crisis about these cases, maybe there is a new reason. You see, and my colleague know, before this crisis, the husband, sorry, he stay in his work at evening and he return back, and at evening he go with his friend. But during this crisis, especially in quarantine crisis, he stay 20 hours in the home. And the problem became between them and make a kind of negative impact to the woman. And there's another reason I think it's very important, not only in Jordan and region country, in the world. It's the economic factor. Do you know there is a lot of people, there's no income or fixed income. For this reason, this make a kind of pressure for the family and for the wife and for the husband. For this reason, I think the data and the number about this crime, it's this. And the another question about the role for government and official agency and judiciary, really there is the government until this moment they cannot play a real role to deal about these cases. Why? Because they feel it's not priority for them, because they focus on the health situation and of the dangerous cases like murder and like rape. Maybe after the crisis and in this meeting, I'll hope in the future that the humanity and the world became safe about this crisis. It's a challenge for us to find or to research about a new strategy. How can we deal about this kind of cases? In this crisis or in this meeting, if I want to suggest something in my experience, as I mentioned before, it's necessary to make a kind of active for hotline, for example, or make a kind of good relationship with the NGOs. During this crisis in Jordan, the NGOs play very important role to deal about this kind of cases, especially domestic violence cases and child abuse cases, as I mentioned. Maybe there is a kind of suggest to deal about these cases, make a kind of the complaint by remote. Maybe it's necessary for us to make a kind of amendment of law in the future to let the woman or give the woman access to justice by the remote or by social media or by hotline cases. Finally, for this time, I think this the meeting is very important. Mayada, please, it's necessary for the future. I think every question to me or to my colleague who share us in this meeting, they need one meeting to focus about the problem, especially this crisis. It's become as a universal and global problem, not only in Jordan and region. I think the world became as a small village in this crisis. Maybe after 2 days, maybe you read in the social media today, the court, maybe it's open. In my court, they give the domestic violence cases priority to deal or to continue the efforts. How can we resolve the problem in this crisis? That is shortly in my time I want to tell you, and back to you, Mayada, and thank you again to give me a chance to share in this meeting. Thank you, Mayada.
Thank you so much, Dr. Muhammad. I was going, the first question I was going to ask you, when are the courts going to open? So you've already answered our question. We don't have much time, but I will read some of the questions. You said that we can connect remotely.
Yes.
I know that many have started, first, the civil society is a bit crippled because of the curfew, and they have not given role. Like, they have not really been given a role. The role of civil society, as you know, has not, especially in Jordan, severe crippled. And when it comes to remotely trying to, say that there's an issue with women, there's a problem of many people thought of doing some kind of GPS systems or systems in which they can get locations, but you can't use that in Jordan because it's prohibited. So there are all these restrictions on doing stuff. So what do you recommend? How can we get civil society more active? How can we engage them more at this point?
About this point, I want to tell you something. We have experienced before 5 years ago with the Family Protection Department. We make a kind of multi-agency or one-stop shop to deal about this kind of cases. Yeah. I mean, in the family protection, you see the judge and the prosecutor and the social worker and the NGOs and the religion man to deal about these cases. And also we amended the law before 3 years ago because the law allowed to use a new technical issue to let the woman to continue or to go to the police department and to the judges. Maybe in this crisis, I'll deal with the 3 cases. We allowed the woman to go to the police because it's a very dangerous cases. I cannot talk about the details about these cases on this meeting. Maybe later on I'll tell you and to take these cases as a pilot project to build on to the in the future after the crisis and after we pass this crisis. And also finally, sorry because delayed, and also it's necessary to make a kind of strategy for a long run, not only in the crisis. I think we need in this crisis to review our procedure, our law to deal about this kind of cases in the future.
Actually, one of the questions said, how can we amend laws and to modify them? And I think that was your answer. I just want to say that they are theme-based. This is like a general session, but we will be doing theme-based sessions, and which will be special for like domestic violence and then special for education, all that. But we said let's open it up first, to throw the issues all at the table, and let's discuss, and then slowly we can move into other discussions. Does anybody have any questions? We are running a bit of time. The question was about laws, which you actually answered. So, oh yeah, sorry, there's a question answer here that we can. Thank you, Judge, from Muna Nazal. Thank you, Judge Muhammad, for being activist for women's rights. Women's rights are human rights. For the Swedish ambassador.
And happy Ramadan and happy Eid for the all.
And then she asks you, what inspired you to take a proactive role in women's rights and an advocate for women? Did you have a role model? Like, how can we engage more men? I think, Mona, that's what you're trying to ask.
It's for
how
me.
Did you get into it? How did you get engaged to it? And how can we get more? Like, what did you have a role model to actually help you to, to inspire you?
Maybe, as I tell you before, in the future or after the crisis, we deal, especially yesterday, we have a meeting in National Center for Human Rights, and we talk about this issue. Maybe we want to make in the next week personal meeting to deal about this issue, and I tell you the details. Because we became as a partner, and us or government. I tell you what our recommendation about this issue later on.
Okay, thank you very much, Judge Muhammad, and thank you for all the speakers. This is going to be, I'm sorry, we went a bit off more than scheduled, but I thought we'd leave the speakers to speak, and then you can ask them the questions. So I didn't want to cut anybody while asking. I'm sorry for those who I couldn't answer. I know, Rania, you had a question for Rania Qamhawi for the education part, which I missed. Thank you for the participants who've joined. As a closing, which I'm not sure if you want to connect to join the closing, but I would want to say that the idea of this series for us to connect, the ideas of this series is for us to network and to remain together, to bring the issues to the surface, and maybe we can make smaller committees, subcommittees, smaller webinars that are more focused, more specific, and we can make it on like a regional basis, we can make it on local basis, so we can collectively, the people who are working on the issues of equality and to understand the gender dynamics in the COVID era, and in order to pave the way to a better future for women post COVID. So thank you, everybody. Dr. May, do you have any final remarks?
Only to say thank you, Mayada, for this excellent, really excellent webinar, and for being yourself a role model on how to be an activist and on how to tackle issues difficult and less difficult, and how to always continue to put women in the forefront. Your example about the women heroes was superb. Yes, there are men heroes, but there are also women heroes in Jordan and in the world. So thank you, Mayada, for this excellent work.
Thank you very much, and thank you all, and thank you participants, and thank you for the active participants who want to also participate in committees. We will stay in contact until the next webinar. Thank you for all your times, Thank you, and goodbye, everybody.
المرأة إلها الحق مثل الرجل للعمل. لازم المرأة يكون إلها صوت، لازم المرأة يكون إلها القدرة إنها تختار.
يقوم مشروع النساء كشركاء في التطوير والتقدم على تعزيز المهارات القيادية للمرأة في الشرق الأوسط وشمال أفريقيا.